Hello again, class. Today we're going to take a look at solving two-step inequalities. We're not going to go into the graphing and the solutions. We're just going to go into how to solve them and make sure we're doing that correctly. The graphing is no different. It's always make sure your variable comes first and then graph in the direction that you are being told to graph. So, first problem I see this up here just like we've done equations before. We're going to solve these inequalities the exact same way. The only difference is now we are, instead of having an equal sign here, now we have that inequality, and we know that just in case we'll have to either put our variable first at some point if it doesn't come first in the inequality, or if there's a negative variable up there, we may have to divide or multiply by a negative number. But in this case, I don't see that situation. What I do see is, and this is what we did with equations, we draw that horizontal line again to show where our variable was, and in this case it's on the left hand side, so I need to get this 7x alone, so that means I have to add 9 to both sides. Now after I added 9 to both sides, in that case, negative 9 plus 9 is 0. That means I can drop down my 7x. I already dropped down my inequality sign, my less than, because I did not multiply or divide by a negative number. And then 19 plus 9 is 28. Last step, because we said it's two steps, in this case I need to get 1x, so I have to divide both sides by 7. 7 divided by 7 gives me that 1x, and because this 7 is not negative, my inequality sign is still facing the same direction. And then 28 divided by 7 is 4. Okay, now we're going to look at another example. We covered these type of examples with equations up here. That's where we had the entire variable and quantity up top above our fraction. So in this case, we remember that we placed parentheses around this whole quantity, and then what we did then to get rid of this 5, this divided by 5 in the bottom, if we remember correctly, we multiplied both sides by 5. So I multiplied the right side by 5 over 1, the left side by 5. And again, I'm identifying where my variable was. That's why I decided to start on the right side, because there's my horizontal line. And because I'm not dividing or multiplying this by a negative 5, my inequality sign stays exactly the same. Now we do the fun stuff. We know that 5 times negative 6, I got ahead of myself, is negative 30. We know that these two 5s right here cross reduce and make 1, because 5 divided by 5 is 1. And then the p plus 3 may just drop right in. And now it's a one-step inequality. In this case, now I need to get this p, this variable alone, so I have to subtract 3 from both sides. In that case, it allows me to get p plus 0, so I have p. My inequality, because I'm not multiplying or dividing here, stays exactly the same, and now it's just an integer problem where I have two negative signs, same signs, I'm going to add and keep those. That's a negative 33. Now, what I didn't have to do in the last problem was I didn't have to change this around because x came first. In this case, p does not come first, so in order to graph this, I need to write it as p coming first, and then I think about if I'm reading this in reverse, p is now greater than negative 33. Okay, 2 examples down and only 1 to go. Before I start on this last example, your code word for tonight, maybe I should use my pen. Code word for tonight is a very simple one. It's just term, T-E-R-M. And that's referring to any type of term that we're talking about algebraically. So if I'm looking at this negative 2t, that is actually the whole term. That's what we call that. So term is your code word for tonight. But before you do that, one last example. Now, not only do we have our variable on the right side of the inequality, we also, if you look ahead, this is a negative 2t. So I will have to abide by a certain rule in a second. Before we do that, I got to get this negative 2t by itself, so that means I have to subtract the 8 from both sides. So we're going to start there. And because I am not dividing it, my inequality sign may just drop in. So then 8 minus 8 we know is 0, so I did get my negative 2t alone. And then 20 minus 8 is 12. So that's the simple stuff that we know already. And now if you picked up on it, to get this to be a 1t, we're going to divide both sides by negative 2. Now, I want to make a note of what's going to happen here. First, we are dividing, so we have to start thinking, is this a positive or negative number? Because that will change our sign around. Well, this is a negative 2, so Yes, I know that negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1, which then gives me a positive t. I know that 12 divided by negative 2 is negative 6. But then because this was a negative number, this inequality sign, we know by rule, has to flip and change and go the opposite direction. Now, the last part of this is, again, just like in the prior example, we have our variable coming second. So negative 6 is greater than or equal to t. We need to write t first, which would then be t is then, I read it backwards, less than or equal to negative 6. So now what you have to do is get onto the form. There will only be about 3 questions, and do the best you can on it. Good luck.